If you've got a clear line of communication with China, the question is a new diplomacy possible while the United States maintains a military option, a unilateral option, on the table in order to induce a diplomatic outcome? What might that look like?
Yeah.
With our Chinese friends, that may mean, for example, will the Chinese begin to reduce oil exports to the North Koreans if, for example, there's another nuclear test? And remember, what China has at its disposal is refined petroleum, crude petroleum, jet fuel, aviation fuel, the things that actually turn the wheels of the North Korean economy. Now, the end point for the United States, and I think for China, is to achieve the denuclearization of North Korea. But getting the Chinese into a combined strategy with the United States, which I think is what President Trump is looking for, as opposed to separate or, at best, a little overlapping strategies, is where I think we should be going.
All of us, of course, would like to see this end diplomatically, to end peacefully. Many believe we do not want to get involved in a war with North Korea. But we also need to listen to Kim Jong-un and his threats and take them seriously to prevent. He, at one point, Pyongyang had said during the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, which obviously failed. All talks have always failed. That Pyongyang would never return to talks. Are easing sanctions or putting pressure in the relief of aid by withholding aid, is that really going to be enough to stop them from trying to move forward with their nuclear program?
It depends on what type of sanctions you're talking about. There's stuff which is kind of like a mosquito bite, or there's stuff which actually matters. And that's why I go back to the question of oil. Or if you don't have oil in the American economy, guess what? Things stop. And guess what? The North Korean economy, small that it is kind of the same. So I think that is where the focus should come. Also, when you look at a possible combined new diplomacy between China and the United States, it could have a whole series of new things on the table which avoids any form of military action. It's tough, it's hard, and I think President Trump, through his conversations with President Xi Jinping, will be fully briefed on the complexity of all that and the new elements in it. But just to pause on the question of the military option, the key complexity for the United States is this. If there was a unilateral strike militarily on North Korea in order to degrade or to destroy or to retard the North's nuclear capability, then the question for all American military planners is, what does the North then do immediately in response by way of a military attack on the South, using the vast array of artillery it has on the parallel, not far from Seoul? What will be the loss of life and destruction in Seoul if that were to occur? And what will be the attitude of the incoming new South Korean president once they have their elections on the 9th of May, which is very soon? I think these are the variables at play at the moment. So pumping up what I think the president's now trying to do, a new combined diplomacy with China, is the way to go.
Absolutely, China holds the key here.
I believe to a large extent, if you speak to the Chinese, it's not as if the North Koreans simply do what China says, because, for example, my best advice is the Chinese ambassador in Pyongyang has never met Kim Jong-un. There's a lot of frostiness in that relationship because China has backed anti-North Korean sanctions before through the United Nations Security Council. But apart from what China says, what will it do vis-a-vis oil supplies and other forms of financial and other sanctions in relation to the North? And if there is, for example, in the days ahead following the activities we've just seen in Pyongyang in the last 24 hours...
How about the threats, too?
A nuclear test, etc. Then I think we're into a whole new world of bringing in urgency to those new diplomatic pressures.
Okay. I mean, Kim Jong-un came out, in fact, and said, if the United States decides to strike, they will come to the United States. While it does not currently have a transatlantic type of missile that could potentially carry a nuclear warhead on it, there is a concern there. Should we be worried?
See, what I'm always worried about is someone who's followed this issue for a long time, and I've been to North Korea a few times myself as well over the years. The key question is not what North Korean leaders say, because there's always belligerence. It goes up, it comes down, but it's mainly up and always getting higher. The key thing is to observe their technical progress. That's the real technical timetable here. It's about missile range, missile accuracy, your ability to miniaturize nuclear material.
Their ability to go transcontinental with a missile. That's what a lot of people fear.
Or even medium-range missiles and their capacity from a submarine to reach Guam.
Right.
I mean, these are also potent. So therefore, the question is, how do you deal with each of those as the technical timetable unfolds? I don't believe their language, even the most recent one, is the thing which should worry us most. It's the technical progress, and secondly, in the response, what can the US now do in the months ahead with China?
I believe we are in a good position. I believe that the meeting with China's president and President Trump went well. I believe we definitely did send a very strong message as we went ahead and dropped those 59 Tomahawk missiles in Syria while we're trying to get China to get on board to prevent that from ever happening in North Korea.
On the Mar-a-Lago outcome, my background is I'm a China analyst for into politics. But the bottom line is, I think the China outcome as it relates to North Korea was a good one. There's now a high-level group involving Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, as well as General McMaster, the National Security Advisor. These are smart guys. They know what they're doing, and there's a timeline to work through what now can be done with the Chinese.
All right. Thank you so much. Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister in Australia, thank you very much for coming in.
It's a chance for North Korea and leader Kim Jong-un to show the world some muscle. Military specialists keep a close eye on Pyongyang's military parades for clues about developments in the North's capabilities. And today, they were not disappointed. First came submarine-launched ballistic missiles, armed with new technology. And the new Pukgungsung 2, or Polaris, medium-range missiles, never before seen in public. But what took most by surprise was the public unveiling of an apparently new intercontinental ballistic missile. There are fears that the North could develop a nuclear warhead small enough to fit it and strike US soil. It all comes on the biggest day of the year for North Koreans, a time to celebrate the country's identity. But this year, the Day of the Sun is coming amid growing international fears of North Korea's nuclear threat and rising tensions between Washington, D.C. and Pyongyang.
If the United States wages reckless provocation against us, our revolutionary power will instantly counter it with an annihilating strike, and we will respond to full-out war with full-out war, and to nuclear war with our style of nuclear strike warfare.
The United States and South Korea have been conducting war games off the coast, which the North sees as practice for an invasion. US President Donald Trump has also been tweeting on the issue, saying that the North is looking for trouble.
You have two of the most unpredictable people on the world stage facing off against each other. You have armed armadas in position, and you have 11,000, reportedly, pieces of artillery aimed at Seoul. It's an explosive situation. The question is, how will it be resolved?
Craig Leeson, Seoul, for Inside Story.
So far this year, North Korea has fired at least 7 missiles. In January, Kim Jong-un said North Korea was in the final stage of preparing to test launch an intercontinental ballistic missile during his New Year address. The following month, it test-fired a new type of surface-to-surface medium-range ballistic missile in the western province of North Pyongan. In March, North Korea launched 4 ballistic missiles. They are believed to be an exercise targeting US military bases in Japan. And the most recent test happened on April the 5th, when North Korea fired a missile into the sea off its eastern coast. Well, let's bring in our guests. In Beijing, Aina Tangen is a China analyst and an independent advisor to the Chinese government on economic development issues. In Busan, South Korea, Robert Kelly, Professor of Political Science and Diplomacy at Busan National University. And in Singapore, Graham Ong-Webb, Research Fellow in the Institute of Defence and Strategic Studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to this edition of Inside Story. Robert, could I begin with you in Busan in South Korea? What's the atmosphere there like amongst South Koreans? Are they concerned, rattled, worried?
This is a little bit scarier than past war crises. These happen every few years. I still don't think that South Koreans take it as seriously as the international media does. the American media particularly seems to take these very seriously when they occur. The South Koreans have been living under the North Korean gun now for 60 years, so I don't think they get rattled by this much anymore. If you actually look at the Korean news, they're spending a lot of time talking about the Korean presidential debates, the Korean post-impeachment presidential elections coming up next month, the sort of regular coverage. There's not a great deal about it. There's more than usual, I would argue. Yeah. I think people are more aware of it than in the past, but it's not like what you see in the international media, no.
Well, let's go over to Beijing and Ina Tang in there, who you saw in Craig Leeson's report. Good to have you on the programme, Ina. China's position and words on the issue have been markedly different in recent times. What does this really tell us about sort of China's position towards North Korea? Is it shifting?
Well, obviously there are some new flies in the ointment, and Donald Trump is one of them. You have two very unpredictable people, and Beijing is sitting on the sidelines hoping that they will come to something reasonable. Obviously, there have been some new developments from the Chinese side. They have canceled flights without comment from Air China into North Korea. They have issued a statement saying quite plainly, we do not have any treaty obligation to come to the aid of a North Korea seeking to become a nuclear power. They also have cut down by all of the coal that they were previously buying from North Korea. That is 1/3 of the cold hard cash reserves that the DPRK was earning each year. So yes, there has been a very marked change.
In terms of the diplomacy and the expertise that is required by China, as you say, they seem to be stuck in the middle between a US and a US president they're still trying to measure up to and try to find out what he's all about, and a North Korea, you might say, the devil that they already know rather than anything else. So they're stuck between this pit of insecurity.
Yes, they are, and it's a very unusual situation for China to be in. This is a smaller neighbor. They have been trying desperately over the years to try to get the DPRK to embrace some sort of economic revision. Quite frankly, they've been pointing to their own system. They have offered aid. They have built railway stations, all sorts of economic zones, and yet they remain empty. In fact, those who perilously get close to the Chinese government end up sometimes at the other end of an anti-aircraft gun. So very, very difficult to read. One of the things most people internationally don't understand is that Pyongyang fears and hates China actually more than the U.S. It has always been their theory that China was trying to establish control over South Korea, and there has been as much bitterness in the relationship as anything else. For instance, Xi Jinping has not yet met the leader of the DPRK since he came to power, despite having met 3 times with the South Korean president, who is now, unfortunately, looks like going off to jail. So you have this situation, and every time Xi Jinping seems to get near a microphone that is talking on international issues or important relationships, young Kim decides that this is an opportune time to light off a missile.
Okay, let's move over to Graham on Webb. We'll talk about the military aspect of what's going on in that region in a moment, but it comes after, Graham, the US's intent, you might say, in terms of what we've seen recently in Syria and in Afghanistan just a few days ago, in terms of bombings and missile launches. So one wonders what sort of message the United States is sending just in those launches rather than the flotilla of military naval vessels that are on their way to the area.
I think the gist of the message coming from the Americans right now is that they are not bluffing. As to whether they are bluffing, the next few days will give us that answer. But in the run-up to what's been going on, yes, certainly the reprisal against Syria for the chemical weapons attack against the civilians, and the reprisal against the Afghanistan government or the Afghanistan authorities for sponsoring Islamic State as a terrorist group, certainly are messages that are being telegraphed over to North Korea saying that we will use an inordinate amount of force, destructive force, to as a reprisal or to take out your military capabilities because they threaten our national security.
If you do see that as a message, then Robert Kelly, can I come back to you? Because there have been in the past a way of communicating between North and South Korea, and those lines of communication have been, to my understanding, become very strained over the last few months, if not the last 18 months, 2 years. How do you see those backdoor conversations right now? If North Korea is concerned about the United States, are they in any shape or form communicating that to the South?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. Under there were two liberal presidents in South Korea from 1997 to 2008, and there was actually a great deal of communication then. Under the succeeding two conservative presidents, a lot of that has been eliminated. There is sort of a great deal of sort of rumor out there that there are backdoor channels between North and South, but there's no sort of overt conversation at this point. I mean, there is sort of on technical issues at the DMZ zone, but there's no sort of open conversation. And if there was, it would be huge news in South Korea. Right? There's also sort of hints that the North Koreans sort of talk to South Korea through the United States at the United Nations and stuff like that. But again, there's sort of like nothing really that's sort of like well established above board, sort of track one. If anything, it's sort of track two going through maybe sort of like a third party embassy that is both in Seoul and Pyongyang.
I mean, you alluded to it at the beginning of your conversation. Aina Tangen has also mentioned it. I mean, Seoul has had its own domestic worries, the whole issue over the presidential's impeachment. How much has Seoul taken its eye off the ball when it comes to dealing with North Korea, dealing with its missile launches, dealing with its rhetoric that comes from Pyongyang?
Certainly South Korea has been in political stasis basically since October when the scandal broke. What they call Che-gate, which is what brought down the president. When there's a new South Korean president in May, after May 9, things should be a lot clearer because then you at least have sort of formal policy direction from the top. In terms of defense and deterrence, though, a lot of that stuff is already sort of baked in. South Koreans and the Americans have been practicing and drilling together for a long time, right? So there's no sense that sort of South Korean security is actually at risk because they're lacking a head of state, a formally elected head of state. The real issue is, I think, what you're sort of pushing at, which is that are the South Koreans actually sort of diplomatically involved in this, right? If this really starts to spin out of control, can the acting president actually speak with genuine political legitimacy? And there's just never really been a situation like this before in South Korea. So nobody really knows. I would actually say no. I would actually say that this is one of the biggest problems that President Trump faces if he wants to bomb North Korea, is that he would actually want to get the South Koreans on board. And it's not clear if an acting president who never got elected, who's not particularly popular, could actually assent to that or reject it with any kind of popular legitimacy. At the very least, if the United States is going to attack North Korea, it has to wait another month.
Indeed, Graham, the reason that, as Robert would say, they'd have to wait another month, firstly, you've got the vice president in the region already speaking to regional leaders, both in South Korea and Japan, and also there is a UN Security Council meeting at the end of April, which is to deal with North Korea. Again, elements for later on in this conversation, but can I just bring you in that the US hasn't taken its eye off Pyongyang, and it wouldn't take its eye off when the issue of nuclear or even chemical weapons is mentioned, because it's been alluding to the same sort of thing in Syria and Iran. So America, in some shape or form, has continued to focus on North Korea, and how important is it then to make sure that their military supports that, you might say, focus at this moment in time, because it has both bases in South Korea and in Japan?
Well, the focus is quite clear. It is North Korea. And coming back to the strategic messaging we were talking about earlier, there's a lot to be read out of what happened with the Tomahawk salvo against the missile, the air base in Syria. It alludes to a range of things. I mean, the focus is North Korea primarily in terms of the nuclear threat, but it's not being taken off the table yet. That there are other potential risks to be had from the North Korean side of things. In Tokyo, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe alluded to the concern over a sarin gas attack from a medium-range ballistic missile being launched and hurled over into Japan. So the attack against Syria has several messages about how the Americans are reading the situation and how they understand what North Korea might bring to bear in a military crisis that spins out of control. I mean, North Korea has at its disposal potentially nuclear weapons. It's not quite clear whether they are operational yet. We have different views on this and different factual arguments for and against that. Chemical weapons has been a concern for quite some time, and this is something that could be brought to bear. And I think nothing is being taken for granted at this stage as to what the North Koreans may possibly do over the next few days. If they feel pushed into a corner that they have to act in some way. I mean, the Carl Vinson steaming off into the Korean Peninsula is creating pressure, and that pressure hopefully will work in a manner which it's intended to, which is to get the North Koreans to move away from the brink. But it could easily go the other way.
It's quite perhaps bizarre that we're at this particular moment in time in history when you might say the United States has a history of conflict, whether it be Afghanistan and Iraq in recent times, historically Vietnam and Korea. It knows the region well. It's learnt, hopefully, some sort of lessons from those deployments. How do you think, Robert, I know you're smiling, I mean, I wonder militarily, how do you think the United States is thinking about its deployments and its regional alliances?
Well, pardon me. Okay, the reason I was smiling is because the United States is a superpower that has the luxury of not learning. So we make the same mistakes in Iraq that we made in Vietnam. The United States American military options in the region with North Korea are really, really limited. So actually America's sort of experience with warfare, for example, since 9/11, or even in the 1990s, I just don't actually think that it really applies here terribly well. There are a lot of reasons why striking North Korea would be a catastrophe, not the least of which is that it would take a long time because the North Koreans have been tunneling since the Korean War when we bombed them very heavily. They've been tunneling ever since in preparation for another air attack, which means any airstrike on North Korea would take days, if not weeks. It would look an awful lot like a war. It would almost certainly drag the Chinese in. We don't know what the Chinese-North Korean red lines are for their alliance. If China got involved, then you're looking at a really serious shooting war. Once the airstrikes lasted more than a couple of days, the North Koreans were putting human shields up around sites. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why the lessons of American conflict in the last several decades really just don't apply here. The military options are just terrible, which is why ultimately I think that, today when that NBC report was refuted and Reuters reported that, that the Trump people would come to maximal pressure as their preferred solution, I mean, that's what basically the United States has been saying since the Bush administration, which is sort of the status quo.
Well, let's just take a little pause. I just want to give our international viewers an idea of sort of the geography of what we're talking about and how far these missiles that North Korea has developed can reach. Of course, from North Korea they can reach obviously Japan, much of Asia Pacific, and push themselves over to, of course, Canada, Alaska and parts of the US. For the moment, Aina Tangan, I suppose if you're a Chinese military expert, you're looking at what North Korea has and what it's been targeting or could target through its recent missile tests would be locations possibly in South Korea or in Japan. Would that be a correct analysis?
Yes, that's correct. They don't have the capabilities at this point to push into any kind of serious target in the United States. Firing a missile at Alaska would only invite destruction with absolutely very little to gain. So from the Chinese side, they're very interested in what's going on. But in today's parade, you'll notice that they were making sure everyone knew that they had tracked vehicles. This is very important because they don't have a lot of roads. This means that they're going to have a scoot and shoot capability that will take them beyond the kind of known areas. And also that these are self-contained. They had a number of advanced rocket designs showing 3-stage ballistic missiles. These are all indications that they should be taken very seriously. But remember, the U.S. and neither the U.S. or China is willing to wait until they have a fully developed ICBM delivery system and a portable nuclear bomb that can be put on it. That is not in the cards. At some point, something has to give. China would like to see it happen at the negotiating table. 6-party talks, as they said, before things become irreversible.
Sure.
From the U.S. side, it's not clear. In the bombing in Afghanistan and also in Syria, these were actions without necessarily any kind of end game strategy involved. And this is what people are concerned about. you should also be concerned because the communications between China and the U.S. are not the way they should be. At this point in time, with a State Department that is not fully manned, with new people involved, with Jared Kushner seemingly in control of the China agenda, it's very difficult to see how they have the means and methods to communicate effectively. This is why Xi Jinping, I believe, is calling directly to Donald Trump. It's the only way to know that his message is getting through.
Okay, well, let's move away slightly from military to the politics and sanctions, because Graham on Webb, I just want to bring you in here, because it's not just China that's concerned, Japan and South Korea, ASEAN countries are very concerned, in your neck of the woods as well, and they have for a time been trying to communicate those concerns in some shape or form to North Korea. Malaysia hasn't got very good relations at the moment with the recent incident of Kim Jong-un's brother being killed at the international airport. How do you see the ASEAN or Asia-Pacific countries that have a vested interest dealing with North Korea or communicating their concerns to North Korea?
That's a very good question. There has been an all-round concern within the region among states here in Southeast Asia about the implications of what is going to pan out, or what may pan out in Northeast Asia vis-a-vis the North Korean quagmire. We haven't seen any clear articulations of those concerns yet. I've come across chatter about it. But I think over the next few weeks, depending on how things pan out, at least in the next week with regard to Carl Vinson's presence in the peninsula, there will be some sort of, cohesive or concerted position on the stakes, so to speak, and ASEAN will clearly create some pressure through existing mechanisms with its Northeast Asian counterparts to exhaust the other levers, if you like, diplomatic and economic levers. But that remains to be seen. I'm particularly concerned about the next 1 week, and ASEAN really hasn't stepped up yet to say anything. But yes, you're right, there are concerns. The missile ranges do cover the good swath of Southeast Asia. We have some facilities here in the region, I won't be specific about that actually provide support to the 7th Fleet. And there are clear repercussions about this support. And ASEAN has to come in very quickly to say something very clear and very firm about this, because we need to come to the negotiating table and we need to talk again.
Well, let's just bring in Anna very quickly, because we talk about putting the squeeze on North Korea. China has done that certainly last month with refusing to accept coal shipments, which are a huge money train, you might say, for North Korea to keep their economy going, which is in line with UN sanctions. And Robert, I know you're nodding your head, I'll bring you in here as well in a moment. Let's just get the general reaction about China's dealing with sanctions and how North Korea would react if it was pushed too far. If you squeeze the North Korean economy too much, that's something that China doesn't want to see its people desperate.
No, they don't. I mean, this idea of regime change has not worked anywhere so far in the world, and it's not going to work in North Korea. If you think simply taking out Kim Jong-un is going to solve things, I think you're decidedly wrong, and that is the Chinese view. They're trying to have this tightrope. They know that North Korea is wedded to this idea of having nuclear arms as a guarantee of its sovereignty and that it will be left alone. The best way for everything to be resolved at this point is, yes, trade, but there needs to be an understanding between the U.S., China, and the DPRK and South Korea about what the future lies. China's concerns are about the troops and the new missile deployments, especially THAAD, that are going into South Korea. The way to diffuse this is to have one country or the other guarantee the sovereignty of the DPRK. That could be China, it could be the US. Okay. But if any such thing were to happen, it would have to be at least a four-party contract.
Okay, I just need to bring in Robert Kelly very briefly for a final comment, really, because if we are moving towards the scene of politics and diplomacy, we have to also look to the end of the month and the UN Security Council, how North Korea would react from any sort of adjudication against it will be very important.
Well, they almost certainly will reject it, as they have in the past. I mean, if there's anything we know about North Korea, it's that they put their foot on the accelerator when they're challenged. I would be very surprised if North Korea takes any kind of, UN sanction or reprimand seriously. I would argue that a lot of this comes down, when it comes to sanction from the UN, a lot of this really comes down to whether or not China is willing to really enforce them. How much will China close the gate? Will they go after North Korean money in Chinese banks and things like that? This really, in my opinion, this really is not much of a multilateral issue now. This is really about whether or not China is going to pressure North Korea or not. I think that's what Trump is doing with the Moab bomb and the Carl Vinson battle group, right? All this is not really to bomb North Korea. That's just too risky. This is really to signal China, to bluff China.
Well, we shall see. Well, indeed, we shall see.
North Korea's Deputy Foreign Minister has been speaking to Al Jazeera, and he said that Pyongyang does not take orders from the United States and can and will protect itself. In an exclusive interview, Sin Hong Chol says the North Korean armed forces are on high alert to respond to any action from the US.
우리는 평화를 사랑하지만 절대로
We are seeking peace, not begging for it. We will defend the peace and security of our nation by our own might. Our army is at a state of maximum alert to respond to the US military build-up. If we notice any sign of assault on our sovereignty, our army will launch merciless military strikes against the US aggressors wherever they may exist, from the remote US lands to the US military bases in the Korean Peninsula, like those of Japan and elsewhere. The recent US manoeuvres and the previous ones, which the US keeps saying are annual defensive routines, have revealed the hostile intentions of the US. Those moments fall within the scenario of preemptive strikes that are directly targeting our Supreme Command and strategic positions, like our missile and nuclear capabilities. The new Trump administration should look to the world with open eyes. The time of dictating orders by brandishing the US military might has gone. If those businessmen in power in the US thought they could intimidate us with military or sanction threats, as the Obama administration used to do and failed, they will soon find out such threats are useless. Unless the US abandons its hostile policies against North Korea, there will be no chance for any future bilateral meetings at any level. It is a prerequisite that Washington gives up those antagonistic policies against us. The six-party talks